So we'll go ahead and kick things off. We're going to be talking about the 10 commandments of community organizing. So I know some of y'all might have been in the keynote, some of y'all might have not. So I'll try and make sure that I cover all the content, but keep things fresh and keep y'all entertained. I want to say thanks again for all our sponsors. A lot goes into planning conferences and in organizing communities. And a lot of the reason we can do that is because sponsors and different tech companies give the financial support that allows that to happen. So be sure to thank them, check them out in the, I think there's like a booth area that you can actually go and click into the sponsors and win prizes and stuff like that. So thank you, sponsors. A little bit about me. My name is Jennifer Wadella. You can follow me on Twitter at @OMG By day, I'm the director of Angular development at a consulting company called Bitovi. Many years ago, I founded a nonprofit called Kansas City Women in Technology. And when we're not in a pandemic, I'm an international speaker. In a pandemic, I'm an international speaker that never leaves my house. I know we've got kind of a lot of attendees from all over the world here. And then I spend a lot of time kombucha brewing and taking care of plants. That's plant lady craziness has become one of my pandemic hobbies. All right, so I like to give a little background about some of the programs I've launched. So about 8 years ago, I launched a nonprofit called Kansas City Women in Technology to try and get more women into tech careers in Kansas City. And one of the interesting things that's happening when I launched that organization was just my eyes were kind of open to a lot of the needs of the community. When I launched KCWIT, I just wanted to find more women like me, like I was a female software engineer. The dudes I worked with were all great, but definitely felt very isolated. And so I kind of set out and I was like, yeah, I'm going to have all these cool, like female software developer friends. And that's totally not what happened. What happened was anybody wanting to break into tech or educators wanting to bring tech to their classrooms kind of started to reach out and say, hey, like we're having this problem. Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And so by kind of hearing that feedback and curating all this feedback that I was hearing from the needs of the community, we launched a bunch of programs. The first one was Coder Dojo Kansas City. Coder Dojo is a global nonprofit based out of Ireland that you can just go to coderdojo.com or .org, I think, and you can, go and start your own chapter however you want to. Ours is shut down on hiatus. We're waiting until we can get back to in-person events, but really easy to do from there. We've launched a lot of other programs that are more women identifying specific. So Coding and Cupcakes is a program to encourage girls to get into technology. One of the really interesting things that happened when we were promoting Coder Dojo is we would have like a lot of parents and like the programmer dads would always like run up to the booth and be like, oh man, I can't wait to sign my kids up. But a lot of times what we would hear from moms is they'd say something along the lines of, oh, a coding club. I'll bring my son. I don't think my daughter would like that. So the parents were automatically preempting their daughters out of like exploring technology just in like a fun coding club. So what do? We make it pink, we make it girly, and all of a sudden coding's okay for girls, which I'm being very facetious here in tongue in cheek. That color has nothing to do with it except for the fact that we're fighting like 70 years of gender-based marketing. And so sometimes we have to flip the script to make sure that we're getting outreach to communities. But anyway, I digress. So this is kind of the trajectory of the different programs and organizations we launched that we would hear needs of the community. We would respond, we would look and assess and say, hey, can we as an organization somehow respond to and solve this problem? There are a lot of times that people reached out to us and there were simply needs that we could not fulfill. So we've kind of stuck to our core coding education programs and creating very welcoming, very inviting, inclusive events that we continue to improve and iterate on. So that's a little bit about my background knowledge and kind of where this content that I'm presenting to y'all comes from. All right, so we talked about this a lot in the keynotes if you were there for the sessions, but why do communities matter? These are our #1 way in the tech industry right now to do workforce development and training. I'm not gonna lie, y'all, like I've been trying to hire for my Angular team for the last year and it's terrifying the state of the industry. I'm very cautious in my interviews. I never want anybody to feel like they're not good enough or not qualified, but I have a lot of people that will come to me thinking they are senior Angular developers at their company. And yes, at their company, they are the go-to person. But when I start to ask some of my basic questions to kind of get a sense of where they fall in the knowledge spectrum of what I would need for one of my senior Angular consultants, they are barely scratching the tip of the iceberg on the depth of knowledge needed. And so we as an industry are not doing a good enough job at the university level, at the boot camp level, or even internally at our company level of training up the workforce we need. So creating communities, creating meetups, creating conferences is literally our best way to train our workforce right now, which is crazy. But communities are the backbone of that. We're the ones who are putting out this content, engaging the speakers, becoming speakers. And so like communities are great because they are how we're going to keep progressing our industry forward. They allow us the opportunity for networking, getting to know other people, getting to hear about other things. Not everybody had the idea of agile development all on their own, right? Like you hear about these concepts, like Jeff was talking about in his keynote, you hear about failures. And so through networking, you can learn from the experiences of others and incorporate those and make your pathway forward. Communities also give you growth opportunities to find out how you don't know what you don't know. So there may be things or concepts that you've never heard of before, and the communities and the events that we provide are great ways to access those. And then I talk about Maslow's hierarchy. If you're not familiar, it's kind of this triangle diagram that's been drawn of what humans need to feel fulfilled or feel actualized. And at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy is this idea of love and belonging and self-actualization. And so that's being a part of a community who understands and can relate to what you do, and you can get a feeling of accomplishment for that. I remember one of my first developer jobs, I was the only in-house developer. And these were back in the IE days. So like dark times, y'all, when I was dealing with a lot of CSS, and I would fix this CSS bug in IE and I would be really excited and I'd like want to celebrate that. But none of my coworkers, they were all client managers, right? They didn't write code. So they had no idea what accomplishment I had actually made or had happen. And so I was missing the sense of self-actualization because like I didn't have anything to gauge myself against to understand my progress. And so communities are a really great way to provide us that. And community organizers are unsung heroes. So if any of y'all are here, our community organizers, this content is for you. Feel free to ask me any questions or share any struggles or anything like that. Because people just forget how much volunteer work goes into communities, into maintaining open source or projects and all sorts of things. So really key to remember. All right, so when I talk about the 10 Commandments, these were rules according to the Christian Bible to basically that people should live by. And they were broken out in the Bible onto two different tablets where 3 commandments, the most important 3 commandments were on the first tablet, and then the last 7 were on the other one. And it's kind of the same thing here. Like I have 10 commandments, but 3 of these are like 3 of those are those are the ones you really, really want to sink into. So we're going to go and jump right into our first commandment, which is thou shalt practice self-care. So I talked about this during the keynote, but your time is your most valuable asset. And the thing with running a community or running an open source project is it's your baby. Like you have passion that is driving you. And it can be really easy to get stuck up on by burnout before you even realize what's happening because it's your passion, right? Like you're the one hearing feedback and coming up with the ideas and driving things forward. And so burnout can be really, really sneaky. And all of a sudden you are just completely fried. You don't have the energy that you used to do. And so it's really important to be cognizant of this as an organizer or an open source maintainer, and just be kind of doing constant check-ins with yourself. So you can say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit fried right now. I might need to step back, reassess my commitments here and figure out what I need to do to balance my load. So a big part of this is understanding how to take on small tasks and improvements. Regardless of if you're running an event, if you're running a conference, if you're running an open source project, there's going to be a lot of feedback and you'll have a lot of area to grow, especially if you're doing this part-time. So one of the best ways to set yourself up for success is kind of break everything down that you need to do into small executable tasks. Even better if those are tasks that you can delegate out to other people. Give yourself office hours. This was really helpful for when I was more engaged in running my nonprofit full time because I was fielding a lot of emails. And so what I would do is I'd have like kind of set hours in my morning, like maybe 7 to 8:30 a.m. before my workday really started. Those would be my office hours for dealing with all my case do-it stuff. Hit that time of the time clock. Anything I didn't get to got snoozed until later on that day. And that way I could have uninterrupted work time. As software engineers, we know how important it is to guard our time and make sure that we have focus time. And you can't do that if you're responding to emails. So giving yourselves office hours to kind of bucket your work in is really key. Again, A lot of your strategy should be dedicated to guarding your time carefully because it is your biggest asset. It's also worth knowing that no is a complete sentence. When you are running an event or you're building an open source project, there's a sense of servitude, right? Like you're building this thing to help other people. And so it can be really easy to take on the weight of their problems on your shoulders. So it's good to know that no is a complete sentence. You do not have to justify why you don't have the time. You don't have to justify. So just be aware of that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about communication and managing expectations, but just a reminder for when it comes to protecting yourself and guarding your time, no is a complete sentence. I also like to share with everybody what I call Jennifer's first law, because this is something that is proved true time and time again. A person's incompetence in email is directly proportional to the likelihood that they will massively waste your time. So if I've ever had an organization reach out to me and they wanted to maybe partner with my organization or do something like that, if they could not clearly convey what they needed or what that would look like, we would get 5 or 6 email exchanges in, and if there was no resolution, if I still couldn't get them to communicate to me in a reasonable manner like how they wanted to partner, it ended up being a complete waste of my time, and things typically did not get better. And when you are focusing on prioritizing your time and figuring out where you can spend your time to add the most value to your project, it's okay to be discerning and say, hey, this isn't going to be a good use of my time because this person doesn't have their shit together. This comes into defining your personal scope and being really guarded to not go outside it. Figure out what your commitment level is. Figure out what you can take on, have that clearly defined, and then use that as a boundary. If that means not doing project stuff on weekends, if that means, hey, you're up against a deadline at work and you need to let everybody know in your community or your open source project that you need to push the pause button for work. These are things to think about and consider and get good at enforcing boundaries around. I also really encourage you to find a task tracking system that works for you, because even if you're segmenting your time, even if you are, using office hours, there are things that are going to come in that are going to pull your focus. And the better you have a system where you can say, hey, this is important, I can't handle it right now, let me drop it into this bucket so it's there for when I get back to it, that can be really good. For me personally, I tend to utilize Trello or my Google Calendar heavily. But when I'm starting to really pile up and have a lot of anxiety, writing out a physical to-do list is something that tends to be very cathartic for me and get me in a better headspace out of this anxiety of, oh my gosh, I have all these overwhelming tasks to work on. A big part of this is learning to own your calendar, because if you've ever been in a situation where you're managing multiple calendars between your work calendar and something else, the more tools and automation you have, the less time you can have to dedicate to having to manage that or deal with conflicting meetings or anything like that. One of the things that I discovered a couple of years into my nonprofit journey was Calendly. And so Calendly is a really great tool that will integrate with any calendars you provide it, show open meeting times, and allow people to schedule you for those meeting times. So for instance, if somebody wanted to interview me for something regarding my nonprofit, I would tell them to go to my calendar link. It would be synced with my office calendar, and then I could set buffers. So like in pre-COVID times, for instance, I wouldn't let anybody book me 2 hours in advance, so I wouldn't have to worry about like driving or traffic or anything like that. You can set buffers to have like 15 minutes between meetings if you're driving to different coffee shops or something like that. So Calendly is a really, really great tool that will allow people to have autonomy over your calendar. So you don't have to do this back and forth email chain, but allows you to put like bumper rails in place to protect your time as needed. All right. I mentioned this in my keynote, but you become, as a community organizer or an open source maintainer, you become the face of that thing. You are the lightning rod. You are the mockingjay. And so that means any criticism, like, any good commentary, any criticism is going to come your way. And so one of the most important things that you can do as an organizer is learn how to field this criticism, because a lot of it is going to be off the cuff, and a lot of it is not going to be given to you in the context of them understanding your workload and everything going on in your life. So you have to learn to decipher it. And especially if you're a newer organizer, a newer project maintainer, it is really hard to not take criticism of this thing that you're building as a criticism of yourself, because it is an extension of you, right? It's your brain, you've created it. But the more you can separate that, the more successful you're going to be in being able to parse through this feedback and figure out what matters. I like this quote a lot. Take criticism seriously, but not personally. If there's truth or merit to the criticism, try to learn from it. Otherwise, let it roll right off you. I remember when the Casey Witt team was scaling and growing. I think the largest we've ever had on our leadership team at one time is 60 people. So that's like 60 people I'm managing. There was a leader who had come on board, and it was so clear that she was dropping balls and it was affecting other people. And it was very hard. She wasn't very responsive to communication. She was no calling, no showing meetings. And then if she would miss information in those meetings, she would get really, really upset and get really nasty and passive aggressive and slack. And I remember that there was one time that it was the middle of our monthly board meeting, and she decided to email the entire leadership team, basically with a 4-paragraph email about what a shitty human being I was and what a terrible feminist I was and why she can't be a part of the organization because I was such a shitty human being. And so it was kind of like everybody's like all the oxygen got sucked out of the room while everybody's like kind of reading this email mid-meeting. And there was obviously it stung a lot because anytime you're getting some sort of attack like that, it's hard to digest. But one of the things that I was able to do after, sitting with it for a couple of days is be able to interpret and say, hey, a lot of this is her blowing off steam because she was realizing that people were catching on to the fact that she wasn't doing her job and it was going to come and turn onto her. And so I was able to, say, okay, part of this is just her covering her ass or pointing fingers, right? But there are things that I can learn from this email to how I did better. Like, could I have provided her more communication opportunities to communicate her concerns to me? What can I do? What can I learn? What can I take away to figure out how to parse that information? And then I see there's a question kind of related right now in the Q&A about what's the best way to deal with trolls and bots. And I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit when we talk about managing expectations, because that is a common occurrence. And yeah, that's something you will definitely deal with. So while we're finishing out this section on protecting yourself, prioritizing self-care, building your network is key. Find other people who are community leaders. You want to give yourself people to talk through problems and talk through ideas with. If you can find a mentor in the community, that's great. And then one of the other things is you can also mentor other budding community mentors, like community leaders, or make sure you're bringing people together to kind of be discussing these things that happen. And learn to delegate. We started running a Django Girls event many years ago. And one of the best things that I ever did was I kind of bootstrapped the event myself the first year. And then I portioned out all the tasks that needed to get done to make this event successful. And I kind of wrote up job descriptions for that, and we built out a team. And I think just by doing this, we doubled the number of applicants we got to attend the workshop. We doubled the number of mentors we got involved. We doubled the number of sponsors. And the event, the better we got at delegating and building a team, the more exponentially it grew. So I cannot understate the importance of one of the best things that you can do to set your personal project up for success is figure out how to grow a team of invested volunteers. All right, thou shalt become an expert communicator. Main idea here is don't assume that people are into your organization or your project as you are. You know everything that's going on, but they don't. And so you need to be really cognizant about making sure that you're communicating things out. You need to choose this communication format based on your recipients. I know Slack or kind of these asynchronous chat channels have really taken over. And these are great tools to have conversations if everybody is online at the same time and available. If there's a quick question and answer, you need to get something answered right away. Slack can be good for that. Or just like random bullshitting or like sharing funny stories or memes or whatever, that's fine. But I see people using Slack a lot of times when they should, when it comes to, community organizing, project management, anything like that. So relaying anything important to everybody should not be in Slack, because once it goes past that fold, it goes to Narnia. It no longer exists, y'all. Like nobody is going to find it again. So you need to have a way to communicate important organization-wide information that's not going to be lost past the fold. This is not a good place to give feedback. This is not a good place to handle feedback. There's a lot that we can lose just through text that can just cause a lot of problems and a lot of heartache. This is also not a great facility for group brainstorming and decision-making, because again, if everybody isn't present and available, a lot of things can happen that'll be really, really problematic. One of the things you could do is make things easy for people to consume by using lists and calling out important information. I've had a lot of success with date formatting because a lot of us are either operating against, some sort of schedule, some sort of event planning schedule, or maybe feature release or something like that. So the more you can format your information to stick in people's brains, the better, right? Like we as humans are going to automatically try and parse information. So instead of sending like a paragraph long word vomit at people, be thoughtful and cognizant about the way you're conveying information. List out important details. If there is a CTA, handle that. Date formatting. I really like saying the date of the week, the day, and the time zone. I feel like that helps lock people in better because they'll be like, oh, Tuesday the 30th, I have that keynote, versus if I'm just like, oh, I have a keynote on the 30th. Where does that fall in my week? So by adding that day, you're giving people a little bit of an extra cognitive boost to maintain the information that you need them to. And by my nonprofit, I used to send out an email like this monthly that was just like a huge big picture overview. So that way people who are kind of tunnel vision focused on their project could have a good idea or understanding of big picture things that were going on and be able to chime in. Key thing here, anytime you're trying to get information from people, if you want a response from anybody, you need to end with a very explicit, very specific call to action and a date. Hey, I need you to confirm panelists by X date. And so this makes it easier for people to prioritize in their own workload, but then you also have a recourse to follow up and say, hey, if you wanted this to happen, this was the date and the deadline I gave you to get it complete by. Adapting this communication strategy may seem like a lot. It's going to take more time and effort on your part at first, but this is like doing that advanced planning that's going to cause all these problems from piling up later on. So the more you can front load this work, the more chaos and drama that you're going to deal with down the line. And that's really the goal, right? Is to reduce the amount of work we're doing for the same amount of input or output, excuse me. All right, thou shalt manage expectations. So I joke about this all the time, but people are not psychic. People are not psychic. People are not psychic. So you need to do the best job you can to communicate what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be providing, how are you going to be providing that, because people are going to make a lot of assumptions without realizing it, and they cannot possibly know the things that you know. They are not psychic. A lot of times we'll get feedback that's something along the lines of, well, I thought it was going to be this. The better you can set people up for your events, your delivery, your output, the better the outcome will be and the less complaints that you will get. So this is a common problem in coding if you're doing anything introductory level. Sometimes a big part of coding is just getting our environment set up, right? And so one of the things that we've struggled with early on is attendees joining our events and being like, oh, well, I thought I was actually going to be coding, not doing all the setup work, not realizing that this is a huge part of what we do in an industry, right? Anytime you onboard into a new environment, there's all sorts of onboarding. So the better we've gotten at communicating that verbally or kind of giving event schedules or things like that, the more managed people's expectations are, and we get less irrelevant feedback like this. So again, you may have heard this, oh, you mean my real job? People are confused by the fact that you're not doing this side project full time. This is something that you need to remind people of, because for some reason they think that volunteer organizations aren't restricted to the restraints that traditional businesses are, which is completely not true. And so it's good to get used to managing this and reminding people of that. All right. And that brings us to this section that I'm going to call Crazy's Gonna Cray, because you can do the best job in the world communicating. You can do the best job in the world managing expectations. And there will be people that will show up and find something to bitch about. They will find some reason to be unhappy. And so this is a key thing of dealing with trolls and bots. I know one of the things that I've seen happen to a lot of open source communities, particularly last year, is we saw a lot of tech organizations basically putting up Black Lives Matter banners because we wanted to express our support of the Black community and understand the implications, and especially understand the underrepresentation in the tech community. And a lot of trolls got really butthurt and kind of pulled the all lives matter crap, a lot of those conversations are not going to be solved overnight, and they are going to be a massive waste of your energy, time and energy. Like, just don't argue with idiots on the internet. They will beat you down with their experience. And so one of the things you can do to better protect yourself and your organization as an organizer is have a good litmus test, have a quick way to figure out if something is a troll or is a bot, and kind of have a do not engage policy with your team. Delete silently and move on. Like sometimes it can be really good and really validating to like argue or like, you know, just rage at that person, but it's very, very rarely productive and it's just going to suck your emotional energy. So that's definitely my advice, is to just move on from the crazies. And the more experience you get, the more you can discern between somebody with valid feedback and somebody who's having a bad day and wants somebody to take it out on. On that note, it's really important to know your value system. Be confident in your values and be confident in upholding them. I mentioned in the keynote that we really like partnering with other organizations that have similar focus to us, so we can like bootstrap like existing workshops or things they've done, help spread their brand and that kind of thing. That being said, we've partnered with organizations in the past that did not take a stance on matters that we think were important. At Kansas City Women in Technology, we are a women-focused organization, but we recognize that diversity is more than just white women. And so this is something that our leadership team is very cognizant of, and being intersectional feminists and understanding the experiences that don't mimic cis white women. And, you know, that's really important to us. And we've partnered with organizations that very similarly came out with a different stance of, oh, well, we don't think systemic racism is actually a thing. And when I hear a leader of another organization saying that, we're going to make the choice to walk away and be very, very clear and say, hey, y'all, we don't align here. It would not be a part of our value system. Continue partnering or working with you. So I would definitely encourage you to share your values with your team and also be confident upholding them. You know, if that means, you know, protecting your community, which I hope it would, or not tolerating harassment or things like that, take a firm stance on it and keep doing that. This leads into having a code of conduct and a process. It's not enough just to have a code of conduct. You need to have a way for people to know how to report violations and how your team is going to handle those reports when the time arises. So spend time crafting your code of conduct. A lot of them are open source. For instance, the Kansas City Women in Technology one is open source. And make sure you have policies in place for how to report and enforce it. Communities must be both inclusive and exclusive to serve their members. There's this inclusivity piece where you want to be aware of different backgrounds that people are coming from. But if there are members, there are bad actors that are engaging in behavior that is harmful to your community, to your members, you must exclude them. And that's the bottom line. I like the spot quote a lot. You know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And, you know, this is something important to think about, because as a community organizer, you don't necessarily like want to play God, right? But to best protect your community, you need to be comfortable making those decisions of removing those bad actors and being exclusive to toxic behavior when it's necessary. I see a question: who determines what the values of an open source project is? Probably the maintainers of the project. These are conversations that we need to get better about having. I know there's been kind of this idea in the tech community of, oh, like tech isn't political or anything. But y'all, it is. Like, if we are building technology to be used by everybody, that means we need to be aware of different backgrounds and different stories. So if you're involved with the project, you don't know what their value system is, I think it's valid to bring up the conversation, be like, hey, y'all, like, what are our values? How are we going to treat people? How are we going to, you know, deal with toxic community members? How are we going to make sure that we're not reinforcing bad behavior? All those things need to be a part of managing expectations of your project and what you're going to do. All right. Thou shalt not neglect thy volunteers. Do not make your volunteers herd cats. This is like the biggest thing. I hate when I've, you know, wanted to contribute my time or my energy, and like I've walked into an event and there's just chaos to the point that I don't even know a way to be helpful. So one of the best things you can do is kind of make things really easy. Have parking arrival and instructions very clear for your volunteers. Don't make them be driving around a giant facility, like frantically trying to get a hold of somebody on the phone because they can't figure out how to park. It's stressful. It's a mood killer. Have an emergency contact number available. Caveat here: women organizers, never list your personal phone number. You can set up a Google Voice number for free that will route to your phone, but this is just a way to protect yourself. I learned this lesson the hard way. This is something that we have to do differently as women. Have clear instructions, duties, and responsibilities for your volunteers. The more you can break down the tasks that you might need to have happen, the easier you can farm those out to volunteers. They will be happy because they can be executing on what they need to, and you'll have your designated chaos lead for anything you didn't think of. And then as much as possible, keep your volunteers out of the line of fire for criticism. because you know, as an organizer, there are people that are going to be pissed off and bitchy no matter what. When we were running coding classes for kids, sometimes the parents would come in with a bit of an attitude, and there's more than once that I had to lay down the law and be like, hey, you know what? My volunteers are volunteering their time on a Saturday morning. If you're not able to respect them and communicate respectfully, I'm going to kick you out. Like, that's all it is. So one of the best things you can do with your volunteers is making sure you're protecting them from the kind of things that can happen. Big picture, plan your events ahead of time, give your volunteers as much notice as you can, set calendar reminders, create calendar invites, especially in this Zoom land where we're all in different time zones. One of the best things you can do to make sure everybody's on the same page is just invite on the calendar. It's there. Unless you are sending that calendar invite and it's recurring while you're in Germany, and then you wonder last week why it's 2 weeks off because they pick up daylight savings time 2 weeks later than yours, and time zones suck, y'all. But you can do a lot of things to help your volunteers have an easier time. Also, do not forget to feed your volunteers. I cannot see the number of times, tell you the number of times I've been at like a smaller run conference or something like that, and I just see like the attendees queue up for the lunch line, right? Like a session lets out 5 minutes early and they're already in line, and you just like see the volunteers at the check-in table like looking longingly at the food, and I'll walk up and be like, hey, do you guys have a schedule to go grab lunch? And they'll be like, oh no, like nobody thought about feeding them. And so I'll be like, all right, you two are going to go get cut to the front of the line now. Like, and I'm that bossy bitch that I will like walk into somebody else's conference and make sure their volunteers are cared for. But go get in line, come back, you set the table, they go and go next. So don't forget to feed your volunteers. And find ways to thank your volunteers. Solicit their feedback and act on it. It's getting their feedback is really, really valuable, but you'll make them feel valued by actually acting on it. Offer leadership opportunities, figure out ways to grow and expand and give people authority and autonomy in your organization. Provide nice volunteer shirts. When we're post-pandemic, planning appreciation dinners and parties is really nice, especially to like kind of decompress after a chaotic event where everybody just wants to drink bourbon and chill out. And promote their efforts on social media. If they write a blog post, if they do something like that, like use your platform to help promote them. And if the opportunity arises, like keep them in mind when nominating for like community awards, all sorts of things like that. Again, this is a lot of time and effort on your part, but we'll keep your volunteers coming back. Volunteers are the lifeblood of what we do as volunteer organizations. And so the more you prioritize them and make them feel rewarded, the more they're going to be able to put towards your project. And I know we started about 10 minutes late. So if my moderator can tell me what the game plan is, or if I have to just try and wrap up early. But plan as far in advance as calendarly possible. It's really easy to actually just kind of like say, hey, for the next 6 months, we're going to do events. We have things scheduled out, and then there's not this chaos running up. And so you can start to fill in gaps with speakers and things as you go. I want to divert back to Mark, I think, had a question about trying to get the members to suggest topics and speakers is pulling teeth. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass. People are not going to do it. So one of the best things that you can do that we've had a lot of success with is like schedule out some events, have some topics in mind, and then troll LinkedIn. And honestly, like if you're trolling based on skill sets, this is actually a really good way to get like, make sure you're reaching a more diverse audience of people who might not be coming to your event already. Is because you can filter by skill sets, and you can just reach out and shoot people a message and say, hey, I notice you're an expert in this. We're looking for some speakers on this topic or a panel or something like that. Would you be interested in contributing? So that can be a really great way to do that. Consistency is key. The more regular you can be with your events, whether it's like meetings for open source contributors or just like actual events that are public facing, the more regularly scheduled they are, the more people can plan for an account for them. It's going to be easier to book speakers and volunteers and venues in advance this way. The other big part here is if you have diversity goals, which I hope you do, make an effort sooner rather than later. Do not be making these last minute like panelist requests to like some token minority because you're afraid you're going to get criticized. Like you should be building your panels, building your speaker lineups with diversity in mind at the beginning, not because, oh, you saw somebody dragged on Twitter and oh shit, like maybe now we better like compensate for that. I've got more resources and blog posts and things like that on how to build diverse, inclusive communities, but the earlier you can focus on this, the better. Thou shalt confirm the venue thrice. Cover your ass, cover your ass, cover your ass. Vendors and venues have a lot more to focus on than just your event. And you're the one who's going to look stupid if something goes wrong. So the more you can do to make sure you have checks in place for this, the better. It is your responsibility to make sure that all the moving pieces are there. Like, yeah, it might have been somebody else's screw up, but it's going to be you at the end of the day on the line. And it's also important to be a courteous venue guest. Make sure you're shouting them out on social media, kind of promoting them. Please clean up after yourself. Ask if they need the garbage taken out or anything like that. And here's the big one that I see happen at evening meetups all the time is they'll be in some sort of office space, right? And like everybody does this thing where their talk will end, the session will end, and people are just chit-chatting afterwards. And you see the person who's there to like has the keys to the building and they're like watching your clock. And so one of the really courteous things you can do as a community organizer is to not overstay your welcome. And if you notice this happening, be like, hey, y'all, why don't we go continue this conversation at the bar down the street? And kind of get used to pushing people out when the event ends, but have a way to facilitate continuing the conversations. All right, that shall arrive at least 1 hour before starting time. Setup will always take longer than you expect. Something will have been put away weird. Something will be going on. There we go. Your team or your speakers will be late. Traffic will happen and your attendees will show up early. So the more you can do to kind of be prepared for these different situations, the better. I remember one year at a Django Girls event, we were having it, I think we're going to start at 5 or 7 o'clock on a Friday. And so that way our team could wrap up their day jobs at 5, get over to the venue, start setup. Well, a vast majority of our attendees just thought they'd trot on over right after work. And so we just had like 50 women just sitting in a hallway waiting for us to like set up the venue and have checkout going. So the more you can be aware of like these things happening, and these are known truths, these will happen, the better you can accommodate. Thou shalt test the Wi-Fi and bring any supplies needed. Especially if you're a tech event, no Wi-Fi or shoddy Wi-Fi will just completely tank your event. It's so hard to recover from. If you have ahead of time, if you're able to ahead of time, get in, set up the venue, have contact information for people who can retest the router. Like I've been at companies before that are like larger and they've got this like sysadmin with a god complex who literally has the router locked in a closet. And if you need to do something with that, you need to have his contact information or a way to deal with that during your event. Definitely bring all the dongles. Technically it's on speakers, but again, it's your event on the line. So might as well be prepared. And just like all our organizers have these like clear plastic totes we've bought from Home Depot that just have like all the event supplies in them and all sorts of different things that we've learned over the year. All right, and thou shalt have a designated chaos lead. Murphy's Law, like I mentioned in the keynote, what can go wrong will go wrong. No matter how well you plan for this event, no matter how many community organizing talks you go to or how many horror stories you'll throw for me, stuff will still go wrong. There are always going to be problems you can't plan for, and you need to have somebody prepared to deal with these on the fly. So people with dedicated roles or responsibilities or facilitating the event or emceeing aren't constantly getting pulled away from their focus. Have a chaos lead. Constant vigilance. All right. And finally, thou shalt focus on process improvement wherever possible. Retros are a really great way to do this. After we run big monthly events, we have retrospectives where we have our volunteers and our mentors give feedback. We, scribe everything, like Jeff mentioned, having a scribe is really important. And on that note, do not automatically designate the woman in your group as a scribe. It's something you may not even realize that happens a lot, but is definitely problematic. Talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we do better next time. These are all great questions to start a conversation around that can lead you to have really, really great events or, feature releases or anything moving forward. Any repeat emails you're dealing with, throw on the facts page, especially for open source projects. You have people, they're like, hey, how can I help? How can I contribute? The better you have documented an onboarding guideline for them, the less time you're going to spend with back and forth emails. So start to automate those things. Figure out what your pain points are, what you spend the most time on repetitively, and figure out how to work on those first. Check-in process is huge for in-person events. Those are always the most chaotic times. So spending focus there is really, really key. One of the other things you can do is automate posts to social media wherever possible. I don't know about y'all, I mostly just shit post on Twitter. I'm not a marketing executive. And so having automation for promoting events and things like that is really important. The other thing that you can really do to set yourself up for success is begin gathering data ASAP, especially if you have plans to scale or get funding or deal with an open source foundation. The more data you can get about how many users you have, what your users look like, what those demographics are, the better you're going to be set up to be able to answer questions, go after funding, go after more support. So big picture summary, 10 commandments are here. Practice self-care, become an expert communicator, manage expectations. Don't neglect your volunteers, feed your volunteers, plan as far as advanced as possible, confirm your venue, arrive early, test the Wi-Fi, have a designated chaos lead, and focus on process improvement wherever possible. I've got a couple of resources linked here. Again, these are going to be available on the slide. I've got blog posts that go way more in depth in a lot of the content that I covered today, talking about building volunteer teams, running great events, building inclusive events. And the missing stair is just a must read for dealing with problematic community members. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A now for anything that I have not gotten to, because I know we're a little over time, but I'll be floating around. You can definitely just tweet at me at @OMG on Twitter with any questions you might have, and I will try and get back to you with answers or punt any resources I can your way. Sorry that we lost 10 minutes. So I had to kind of speed talk through some of this, but I want to make sure I'm being respectful to the speaker after me joining. So let's see here. Should we put the early attendees to work? Yes or no? It really depends on the setup of your event. A lot of times if there's complicated onboarding steps or kind of like environment setup or things like that, it can be more problematic because then you're going to be answering the same question over and over and over and over again. If you're dealing with kiddos, one of the things we did at Coder Dojo is we would have some like filler activities for the beginning as people flowed in. Like we would have them getting typing.io, and it's a really cool way to practice like just keep like using your keyboard, but you could do it with different programming languages. And so it was kind of a cool thing there. So one of the things you could plan towards is having something for attendees to do, but a lot of times if you're trying to do training or something like that, you're going to spend a lot more time repeating the same question versus just having everybody wait and kind of chill. All right, I am not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and wrap. Again, sorry for kind of like the rapidness, because I know we got a bit off schedule from earlier this morning. But these slides are available at 10commandments.jenniferwadella.com. I'm happy to answer any of your questions elsewhere, hear about your community organizing horror stories. I hope this was helpful. I hope you can learn from some of my mistakes and some of my experiences, and have a great rest of your conference, you wonderful humans.